Wish Dean. He hasn't had a chance to do some of his rounds because of COVID. But Daniel Pullen, I think you're online, and we'd love for you to welcome us and get us started.
All right, thank you, Peggy, and welcome, welcome Horned Frogs. It's such an honor to serve as the John V. Roach Dean here at the Neeley School of Business. I'm wrapping up, I guess, year 2, and it has been pretty remarkable in the challenges we've had to overcome, but also the opportunity set that transition and change and challenge provides. And so I think the experience that we've undertaken here inside the Neeley School of Business maps very nicely against kind of some of the transformational topics we'll discuss today. And it is always nice to be able to practice what you preach as we educate the next generation of culturally competent, globally responsible business leaders through all of our programs. And I know we have alumni from our undergraduate programs, we have graduate students, alumni, many participants from our executive ed programs, and on and on and on. So it's really excited to just be a small part of convening our connected community in the way that the world allows us to today. This is a really wonderful advancement, an idea that has been brought about under Peggy Conway's leadership, her energy and enthusiasm, and her vision for more intentional engagement and collaboration with our alumni and friends and collaborators and stakeholders. This Alumni Advantage series is just that. It's designed to give you, our alums, an edge, an advantage in the marketplace, because I believe, and I think our faculty and staff believe, that your investment in the Neeley School should not just be bounded by 4 years as an undergraduate student, or 2 years as a full-time MBA, or 6 weeks in one of our executive ed courses, right? It ought to come with a long string of benefits that inures to your advantage for the rest of your career and the rest of your life. And so I think you'll start to see us create more engagement opportunities that can be on the critical path of where you are today and what your aspirations for tomorrow look like, so that we can make that real. And then likewise, hopefully we'll educate you a bit about some of the things that are going on here in the Neeley School of Business that you might want to get involved with. You might want to make an intellectual investment in the future of the Neeley School, helping our current students and otherwise in a variety of ways that I'm sure we'll discuss, if not today, certainly over future encounters. So I'm pumped to be here. It's exciting to be a small part of the innovation and the leadership that's going on as we fulfill our promise to our stakeholders every day to unleash their human potential. And so hopefully we'll do some unleashing today. And the captain of our ship today is none other than Jim Roach, who is the executive director of our executive education program. He's going to moderate today in what is the first installment of our Alumni Advantage series that is sponsored by Jeff King and our good friends at Northern Trust. They have been so wonderful to us to walk with us on this vision, to invest directly in our students, and to make programming, high impact programming like this possible. So thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Northern Trust. And thank you, Jim, for showing us the way.
Daniel, thank you so much, and great to be with everybody today. I'm going to moderate, as Daniel said, so I have the privilege of, in just a second, introducing our wonderful speakers, and we'll moderate our question and answer at the end of their session. Just a couple logistical notes as we start. You're going to receive an email on Monday with a recording of today's session. You're also going to get a reminder to save the date for our next session, which is on September the 8th. So we'll look forward to that one. And as I mentioned, we're going to have time afterwards for you to ask questions. And the way we'll do that today is ask you to use the chat box. So please send a chat directly to me, and I will do my best to moderate, and we'll get as many questions in as we have time for this afternoon. That said, it is my privilege to introduce today's topic and our speakers. And so today's topic is leading through digital transformations. Is your organization prepared? And this is something that at the Neeley School, we have spent a great deal of time thinking about, researching on, instructing on, and you'll see it reflected in our degree programs, our MBA, EMBA programs, and certainly in our executive education programs. Business transformation, particularly digital transformation, is very complex. It can be very challenging. And when you overlay an environment that's moving fast, that's filled with disruption from business model innovation to competitors and new technology, and that is rapidly changing and actually quite complex, it can be very difficult. In fact, many transformation changes and efforts actually fail. So what we're going to talk about today is what are some of the barriers we see, what are some of the key success factors, and why a new leadership style and approach is really necessitated for leading through transformation. Today, we're fortunate to have two wonderful speakers. I'm going to introduce them very briefly and then let them go ahead and get us started. I will start with my colleague, Dr. Mary Obeen. She is the BNSF Railway Endowed Professor of Leadership. Mary is well known nationally and internationally for her research on complexity leadership. She is a fabulous consultant and instructor. She teaches in our EMBA program, our MBA program, our undergraduate programs, as well as in our executive education programs. Does a fabulous job for us. Our other speaker today is, and we're privileged to have Brian Alink with us. Brian is the Senior Vice President of Product Management for Capital One. Brian has over 20 years experience at Capital One, has been involved in their transformation efforts and their digital transformation efforts across many platforms in that organization that touch functions like underwriting, payments, authorizations, customer management, and some of the record systems. His second job, and maybe his sideline, so to speak, which is not really fair to say, because he is responsible for working with their CEO on major technology platform transformations and future efforts that they'll have within that business. He is also, and I'm very happy to say, and I'll say more about this in a little bit, he is also a featured instructor with Mary in our advanced leadership certificate. So we're very happy to have both of them with us today. I'm going to turn it over to both of you, and I will pick up later with the question and answer. So thanks so much.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jim. So I'll pick it up from here and start with an intro. I'm just absolutely thrilled to be here. It's always fun to be with Brian, so I look forward to the conversation. I want to do a little bit just to tee it up, though. I see that Daniel is still here, and I'm thinking of him and his last year in managing COVID as our new dean, and wow, what he landed in, what any new leader in an organization landed in as we went through this really challenging time. And I think it's the perfect way to tee up the session for today. Just to give you a quick couple-minute intro overview of complexity, and to say that we are clearly in complexity now. So when we look at the pandemic and we have experienced COVID, and the work that I do and the work that Brian and I have discussed and how we connected, it was through this idea of complexity. And I would say that Brian and I were kind of ahead of the game on this. We knew that the world was becoming more complex. I started the work I did in 2001, and then I linked up with Brian, I think somewhere around 2016. At some point, we'll have to figure out when it was. But I was doing research on complexity leadership, saying that as this world is changing and there are new challenges being placed on leaders, we need to think about how we have to lead differently. And I have a part of my practice group, Dana Baugh, is actually a coach to Brian. And she called me and she said, Mary, I've got this guy. He's incredible. I know he's doing what you're talking about. He's really ahead of the game. So will you talk with him? I said, absolutely. So then Brian and I got on the phone, and Brian just started talking and I just started listening. It was basically more research for me. I had done a lot of qualitative investigation and knew a lot about what leaders did. And as Brian was talking, not only was it confirming what I knew, it was also informing me of new things I didn't know. So that's what we want to share with you today. And just to give you a sense of what complexity is, complexity occurs in a world that's highly interconnected. So complexity is about rich interconnectivity. And what it means is that when we're in systems and they're interconnected, it creates more opportunity for this rich interaction to occur. And what a rich interaction is, a complexity phase transition or an emergence event. So when things come together and they bump up against each other in an interacting system that's richly interconnected, there are possibilities for a transformation, a complexity transformation to occur, which in technical terms is a nonlinear event. It means that things that were on a linear path are now no longer on that path. They're jarred away onto another path. That's exactly what happened with COVID. So the story of COVID as it goes, whether it's true or not, is there was a bat that was infected with a virus that bit a pangolin that was eaten by a person. That person ate it, a novel coronavirus formed. Then because our world, that was the complexity event, the nonlinear event, the emergence of this, the initial emergence of this novel coronavirus. But because we were in such a highly interconnected world, we know that our transportation systems are interconnected. This thing spread very rapidly. So it's a network dynamic. When a complexity event occurs, What we know is that you have to lead differently. So you have to lead for adaptability. You have to engage in and play in the emergence that's happening around you. It's not a situation that you can control. So we can't use old command and control models. We can't use hierarchical thinking. We have to use adaptive, innovative thinking. And we can't think of leadership as one person. Leadership is a complex, interactive dynamic, a collective dynamic. And ultimately, it's a systems view. So what we're talking about here and what Brian and I will be discussing is a complex systems view, a complexity view that looks at things through an emergence lens of collective leadership in a system that's happening around us. And as you see, that's a very different way of thinking from probably what you were taught leadership is, because traditional models teach it as I'm a leader, I tell other people what to do, I engage with them to motivate them and inspire them through my vision, and then they align with me and they follow me and we get things done. That is not what leadership is today. So this is where I'm going to turn it over to Brian and say, Brian, I know you do this. I know that you have been operating in complexity for quite some time, even before COVID happened. So this was something that you saw coming. You've been leading digital transformation in your own work, and you've been doing this in a very proactive way. So you did it before it was popular to do it. So let's just start there. Will you tell us just a little bit about your story of how you got involved in leading in complexity and the approach that you used? And then from there, we want to go into, is your organization prepared? But let's start with a little bit of background on you, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. And Mary, thank you for having me. Really a pleasure and a privilege to join you all. I think, I started my career in more traditional individual performer roles, analyst roles, and then leading small teams like mini leaders. And a lot of the practices you referred to as the legacy leadership style served me well, listening and building rapport and vision and aligning and so forth. But I would say the first real test that I encountered that forced me into a different mode of operating was a big role I got offered a number of years ago to drive a digital transformation. And I was so excited. I have a background in technology and in leadership and operations, many different things, but having a chance to really drive a transformational project in the context of mobile and digital was incredibly energizing to me. So I took this new role, moved my family, and within a few weeks realized I was massively in over my head. And the thing I recognized is the problem I was trying to solve with a team had so many dependencies and points of leverage outside the sphere of that team's control that I could direct the resources. There was no way I was going to drive the outcome I wanted without finding a way to tap into many different areas of the company and somehow harness all that towards a bigger purpose. And so I realized, okay, if I'm going to survive here, I have to think about the problem very, very differently. And that was the beginning of my embracing and learning and experimenting with this idea of complexity.
So it sounds like you were thrown into complexity and it was trial by fire.
It was trial by fire. And I was fortunate enough to have a good leadership coach in Dana, as you described, and also just a lifelong curiosity and learning to study the extreme cases of what drives better outcomes. And that launched a whole series of sort of leadership experiments that I began conducting in the way I would assemble people together, the way I'd set up context, to start to feel my way through what would unlock a real game-changing shift in the mindset across many different teams to come together with me to solve this very complex problem.
Okay, that's excellent. So that's right where we want to be. So I want to ask you a couple of more questions. Before I do that, I want to say, because I want to make a clarification. So you referred to the legacy leadership style, the style that I mentioned, and I agree with that. I think that's the right term for it. But I also want to point out that it's not only legacy, it's still here. So we still need that leadership style. It doesn't mean that we're throwing it away. It just means that it's not enough anymore. You need the basics, you need the foundational leadership components to be able to engage with the people around you, but then you need to layer on top another mindset, another way of thinking. And I know, Brian, you've been talking about this, that really to have your organization be prepared, it requires a new way of thinking or a new mindset. So can you describe that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. And completely agree that there's still a very appropriate purpose on some of the what we call traditional leadership moves. So this new mindset at times is counterintuitive. The first counterintuitive move that I think is really freeing, actually, is that the mindset is to follow where the energy and the leverage is in the problem, irrespective of organizational boundaries, levels, job titles, backgrounds, and a real almost a science-based pure approach to saying, what is the problem I'm solving? And that in and of itself is a profound question, is getting very clear on that. But then beginning to follow many different leads across a company or a network or even outside your company to find people at all different levels with all different backgrounds who have a perspective into what I like to call the physics of that problem that help unlock insights that can then solve in a dramatic way an outcome associated with that problem. And that sort of lens is a very different lens than gathering your direct reports together and saying, we have a mission, let's go conquer it. That lens is much more of a spreading out in a much broader way across many different areas with a real listening towards, are you talking about a similar problem or a facet of the problem that's related to this central thing that we're trying to drive? And that new way of listening just opens up a completely different landscape of both nuance on the problem, but also energy sources and resources that if you can channel into helping, can unlock a much faster transformation.
Okay, so I'm going to put some academic terms on this, the terms that I've been doing in my own work in describing the mindset that you are getting at. And actually, it's a couple of different mindsets. So I want to start by saying this. So what happens is these mindsets are needed because you're put in complexity. You're put in complexity because the world around you is changing, and it's changing in unpredictable ways. And again, that's occurring in highly interconnected systems. Now, what we know from research is that it takes complexity to beat complexity. So when you're in a complexity situation, you can't respond with order. You can't respond with the old way of doing things. You have to be able to enable what we call an adaptive response. And that's essentially what Brian is describing. So an adaptive response is you have a complexity pressure that comes at you. It creates an adaptive challenge for you. So your challenge is to try to figure out, how do I do something here? And you have to do it differently. All right, so it can't be the same old thing. You've got to operate in ways you haven't before. And there's some other characteristics around that. So what you need to do then is shift your mindset. So if you are operating in your more ordered, stable world and using what Brian calls the legacy leadership mindset, which is great, because that mindset's great for organizations that are in stability. Once you get put into disruption, you have to switch to an adaptive response. That requires your brain to switch. And what you need to do is go into an emergence mindset. So what Brian is describing as an emergence mindset, and I want to dig into that. But in addition to emergence mindset, there's also an adaptive mindset, meaning that I'm willing to adapt here. I'm not going to fight this. I understand that I have to learn and grow from this. I know this is a very difficult situation, and I'm not feeling good in this situation necessarily. I'm feeling all of these things, and part of me wishes that I could just go back to stability and to things the way they were. But I'm looking at it and I'm saying, I'm going to learn from this. No matter what happens, no matter how bad it is, I'm going to take the situation and try and learn and grow from it. So you need a learning and growth mindset, which in our work, I call the adaptive mindset. So adaptive, that's pretty bottom line. And I think that's pretty straightforward. Most of you out there probably get adaptive mindset now. I know our undergrad students do. They didn't necessarily like it, but they clearly have had to adopt an adaptive mindset. But let's dig into the emergence one, Brian, because I think that's the one that most people don't understand. And when a person is a complexity thinker or they're good at this, they really get emergence, but it's kind of a difficult concept to explain. So in emergence, when you're in it, you need to understand that in the system around you, there are things that can link up. And if they link up, they can create opportunities for you. They can create a flow. That they can amplify the thing that you're trying to drive. But they can also link up, create obstacles. So they can also stop. So what you're doing with an emergence mindset is you're operating very much in the emergence dynamic. You have a very agile, this is where agile comes into play, agile way of thinking about, I'm watching going on around me, and it's a systems view. You have to look in all directions, seeing to how they can link up and what this will create or what impediment it will activate as I do my work. So does that sound right to you, Brian? And can you say more about the emergence mindset?
Yeah, I am tracking completely with that sort of distinction that you're making on emergence. Here's like a practical example of the way I've thought about emergence and applied it. In this particular example, and there's been many others like this, we had a large imperative to massively advance our digital engagement with our customers and transform all of the customer interactions between our company and our end consumer into more digital first kind of modes. And as I thought about, okay, how do we do that at scale and then link it to a set of financial outcomes to really move our P&L dramatically, and didn't have all the control to do that. A lot of what I started doing is going out and listening by asking lots and lots of questions of other leaders in other areas to deeply understand the biggest problems they had and what they're facing and what they're struggling with. And what I'm listening for is, are there a set of unmet needs that are representing a tension or a pressure and therefore an opportunity to solve a problem? And where is it that this imperative that I was accountable for was very connected to that same underlying need? And that's an interesting perspective to bring. Now, to your point, sometimes people would maybe raise a whole bunch of obstacles or challenges, or maybe even say things to me that made me feel as if they were objecting or blocking or resisting this change. And what I have really been practicing doing is, the more provocative it is, and the more I feel a little bit like, hey, they're against my purpose here, the more vital it is to stop and really get curious and start to ask what is behind that. And more often than not, what I've discovered is this: those objections or those resistance nodes in the company are actually just talking about a very important dynamic that needs to be honored and taken care of in the context of solving that problem. And so my reframe has been less about, okay, I've got blockers and supporters, and more as, this is vital information that if I embrace and incorporate into an answer, can be the difference between it really flourishing or not. And something really powerful happens with that shift in mindset is you can almost harness what feels like negative pressure into part of how you solve the problem. And then ideally bring those people along, that innovation along, that thinking along, to help advance the very thing you're going after.
So lots here. So I'm going to unpack a bit of what you said. What's different about this approach is that instead of going out and driving something in a traditional way, and a lot of people think of driving, what I think traditionally people would do in the situation you were in is they would generate an idea and then they would go out and try and push it and sell it. What you're saying is you didn't start with that. I think in the beginning you might have in the very early stages, and you learn that didn't necessarily work. But what you do now is you have a problem, and instead of trying to ideate it and then go sell people on your solution, which in our leadership language, I would say that the first thing we need to understand is what leadership is. Leadership is not just management. It's not just the top-down trying to drive alignment around the strategy and goals of the organizations and motivate and produce. Leadership, in this perspective, I can give it to you in a couple of words, is using influence to create change. So what you're doing is you're trying to influence, and you're doing it with the intention of creating change. And that change is to make the organization and the people in it better. So it's aligned all around. It's for individual benefit and it's for organizational benefit. And you don't want those two things out of sync. You don't want to benefit the organization without the individuals, or the individuals without the organization. You want those in sync. All right, so you're using influence to create change. And what Brian's describing is I learned that I had to use more of an influence style, which gets into all kinds of power dynamics. We won't get into here, but I will tell you in exec programs, we spend a lot of time on this, power and politics. But what you're doing then is you're trying to ideate. Now, in the early work Brian did, I remember talking with him, and he was doing this, but we called it flying under the radar. So he wasn't on the radar yet. And I think he's forgetting a little bit in how he tells the story now. Luckily, I have history enough with him. But he was trying to enable these dynamics that we're talking about in terms of getting people on board to drive change for digital transformation, because he knew that Capital One needed it. He knew the world was changing. He knew the organization wasn't necessarily going to get there fast enough. And he took it on his own to try to get there as quickly as they could, or at least to spearhead it, again, before the pressures in the environment were really there. So Brian was the one trying to create the pressures. He felt them, but he was an early adopter, more entrepreneurial. And so he was trying to get the rest of the organization on board. That requires a lot of skill. Many organizations now are more there. So the pressures are there, and you can play in those pressures and those tensions, which Brian talked about. So what he does now is he goes and he feels the complexity pressure. He knows there's a problem, but he goes and talks to people to see where they are. So this style is very, very much about talking, inquiring, listening, engaging. And where I see people make mistakes in it is if they try to drive too much. Do you agree with that, Brian?
Yeah, I think you've just nailed it, because the way I like to think about it is the vision is not to, you have a company moving in a certain direction, and all different parts of it may be moving in slightly different directions, but that generates tons of inertia down a path. As a lone leader, like standing in front of that and trying to just block it all and push it some other place, just think of that physics problem. It's almost an overwhelming thing. But there's a way more elegant way, which is finding inside of all that some very profound unmet needs that you can now solve more elegantly, more quickly, that then creates a bunch of wins and successes for subcomponents of that company or that system. And so the first is to discover what those unmet needs are and link it up to this problem statement. Now, there has to be an openness that the problem statement may be off base, because part of what's happening is you maybe have a hypothesis about a massive need, but you may learn a whole lot that the real shape of the need is slightly different or somewhat different. So there has to be a humility to be wrong on your hypothesis and use that learning process to really dial in this. Now, the move that gives me courage in this system is, what move are you going to make really after you've listened to get someone's attention and have them come help? And the move I think that's powerful is an offer. And the offer is, I am coming to you not saying, what can you do for me? I'm coming to you saying, what can I do for you to help you with this problem you have not yet solved? And what resources do I have I can put at your disposal that now we have a mutual purpose here, and I'm giving, not getting.
Yes.
And I like to call this give to get, which is, I have now identified something powerful that's meaningful to you and me. And I am making the first move to give for the purpose of solving that thing. It's my intellect, my brain power, my time, or my resources, my team, my people, my technology. And I'm now going to go in with you and really powerfully solve a problem that maybe you had been struggling with. Now that little node, once you start creating a win there, is the beginning of starting to redirect energy down a path.
Yes.
And my mindset is, I'll have a portfolio of these, maybe a dozen of them, all running at different stages of maturity. And then we'll talk a little bit about what happens as the wins start coming, because that's a really important inflection point too, is you begin to turn and then what to do with the wins. It's both awesome, but also very dangerous to handle that appropriately.
Okay, I'm going to make a note to come back to the wins. And then I want to tee you up that I want you after this to summarize the innovation flywheel, because I think this is a really great way to describe it. So essentially, what you're talking about is what we discovered early in our work and what I started teaching my students, but they didn't necessarily get it. They all thought I was a bit of a crazy person. But I would say your job is to link up needs. What you need to do if you're trying to drive change or influence change is you link up needs. And that's exactly what you described. So too many people, again, think that the idea is, I have this idea, I've got this great innovation. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I'm going to go push this innovation out and they're going to love it. Well, inevitably, they're not going to love it because you're talking in a language, a local language in your local need. So what you have to do is kind of set aside your excitement and your passion around your own need. You go out and you find the needs, you listen, you find and see what are people's pressures, what are they experiencing, what do they need to have? How can I literally link up what I have to offer with them and we both get a win-win? So as this work has progressed, I've realized really it's a lot of negotiation principles. What negotiation has talked about is don't do a zero-sum game. Instead, look at win-wins. You pretty much have to bring a negotiation mindset to this whole thing. And you also have to understand that the timing may not be right. So if the timing isn't right, then what you're trying to do isn't going to be accomplished. And I use, of course, Justin Smith, I use the example of him all the time, a doctor at Cook Children's in our Cook Advanced Healthcare Leadership Program. He was trying to push telemedicine. And for years and years, and I was watching him and tracking with him as he's trying to push this. And then suddenly last year, in a matter of a month, this thing just went. I mean, it just flew. It was in, and now it is common practice and here to stay. So that's a timing issue. It doesn't mean that your idea is bad. It just means the system isn't able to accommodate it yet. And you have to have patience around that. Don't drop your idea. Don't forget it. Just be watching. And this is where Bryant comes up with portfolio of ideas. And this gets into your innovation flywheel and your wins. Before I do portfolio of ideas, though, I want to bring up something that you told me a few years ago that never left me. I tell this story quite often in class because I think it's so impressive. When Brian early on was doing this work, people didn't get what he was doing. So they didn't recognize this as leadership. Leadership to them was the traditional leadership that produces results. So Brian was in a situation of having to drive innovation and change, drive digital transformation. But at the same time, he's in a system that recognizes leadership as producing results. And so we were talking and I said, how do you do this? How do you have time? Because I know that this innovation work takes a lot of time and energy. Brian said something brilliant. He said, well, I have this thing. It's my portfolio of results. I love this, a true banker, my portfolio of results. So it was maybe 2016. He said, right now I'm about out to 2018, but then I'm going to get to 2019 pretty soon. So I've got all these things set up. I think the emergence mindset and planning ahead, all these things set up to deliver so that I don't have to focus on those. My delivery of results are there. I free my own time up for innovation. Since that, I think Brian has now been able to experience more of that because I think the organization is now giving him more full time for this as they recognize the beauty of it. But now what Brian has done is morphed that. He's morphed it from a portfolio of results into a portfolio of innovations. And this is his innovation flywheel. So his thinking now is, all right, my job is now transformation, digital transformation. To the question of, is your organization prepared? It's only prepared if you've got the right kind of leadership that's driving the right kind of adaptation and adaptability inside. And that requires a different way of operating. So Brian is now actually training, I would say, your colleagues and your peers and teaching and showing people how to do this through his innovation flywheel and portfolio of innovation. So Brian, will you talk about that?
Yeah. So I do think it's really important to not get too discouraged about things that don't go well and to recognize there are time horizons around the efforts that you're putting in. And it does really help to have enough of a set of things in the works that they begin paying off. And it lets you candidly, from a career impact and credibility and results standpoint, have some time to keep investing in those future things. Then that gets into a lot of other things as you get more senior, like have you recruited the right talent and have you set up the right structure and process and a lot of basics that are important to even get in a position to begin to operate this way. But to be clear, this practice of leading through complexity isn't just for leaders of big teams. You can do this as an individual contributor or as an academic driving influence across many different areas. There's adaptive leadership can come from any level. But on this flywheel idea, let me just talk about the stages of the flywheel for a little bit, Mary, because that might be kind of where you're headed.
Yes.
So the stages are the following: is finding the problem that matters in the context of maybe where the world's going, where the organization's going. It needs to be somewhat connected to a bigger movement, or it's very helpful to be connected to a bigger movement, so you're not, so you have some tailwinds of whatever that movement is. It's then finding the leverage in the problem. I think about this as a physics problem, in that once you've defined a problem and you're breaking it down, say you want mobile adoption to go, to 80% penetration of your base, or you want to transform some big infrastructure, or you want to cut cost, or whatever the outcome is associated with the digital change. Digital, by the way, isn't just an app and web. There's a whole infrastructure beneath it that's a whole new way of re-envisioning how you do business using technology. So this can touch any layer of your business, actually. But whatever that problem is, now you've found the physics around the problem, and experts and passionate people who can help shape the dimensions of leverage relative to that problem. Now you're running a series of experiments. You've got people excited, like, yeah, I'll help you, and I'll take your team, and let's go try this thing and see if it works. And maybe you've got 6, 7 of those things going at different facets of the problem. That's a bit of a portfolio inside the flywheel. Now, a few of them start working. And this is the part I was describing that is what I call dangerous. Here's the danger. You'll get all excited. I get all excited about it. And you want to run out and tell everybody, it's working. Look at what we're doing. Look at what, this is the dangerous part. Look what I'm doing. Dangerous. Look what my team is doing. A little dangerous too. Here's why. You have gone into someone else's territory, into their shop, their department, their function. They're letting you in to their space. And transformation can feel incredibly threatening and dangerous. And stealing the credit is not helpful to engendering commitment. And there's a real honor when people let you in to their shop and let you into their space and give you a chance to collaborate. That's a privilege. And it totally justifies sharing the credit. And so the more powerful move to create the ongoing flywheel is, thank you for what you helped us do. We won, we did this, and maybe it's even you. Go tell the story of the win to your leadership team. And that takes a real courage to step back and let the spotlight now shift to your partner and let them take the win. And from a courage now for them to disrupt their own shop, to go through the pain of all the change it's going to take to embrace the adaptation, this thing about credit and fairness and feeling like there's something in it for them matters a lot. It requires the humility to step back and honor that work. Now, when that happens, something incredible happens, which is the next time you come back to that area to say, let's work together again, or let's expand this on an even bigger scale. You've got a friend there. You've got a trusted colleague who will be with you on the next round. And if you can now envision doing this for many years across many areas and many levels, and the experience has been positive, now your ability to influence change in the company has gone to a totally different level. And that is a very, very powerful kind of leadership to establish through that repeated, find a problem, take a risk, I'll give you the credit, we're going to win together. And in the end, we're going to change the company.
Okay, that's beautiful, Brian. You just brought us completely full circle. So perfect. You landed perfectly and right at the time where we wanted to be at the time limit too, so we can open it up for questions and answers. Where he landed us is where we started, and in saying that there is a legacy leadership mindset, but you need to also have this other complexity, adaptability leadership mindset. And to do that, you have to recognize that leadership is not just about a person. So Brian's whole statement about the win and sharing the credit is what we call the collaboration mindset. So originally I was calling it like top down or collective, but Brian coined the term and I'm now using it. Thank you, Brian. Using this term collaboration mindset. And the collaboration mindset is it recognizes that leadership is not me. Leadership is a co-creation among people who are acting as leaders, followers, leading, following, together co-creating this leadership dynamic. It's not attributable to one person, and it's actually influenced by context. So context and timing matters a lot. It deserves credit too. So as you're doing this work, you need to recognize the importance of saying it's not me, so that it shouldn't be ego-driven or egocentric. And essentially what Brian is saying is, once you get into ego, you're in danger. Because you start doing ego, you are going to get played in politics, you're going to get shot down. And that was the lesson Brian had to learn once he came off of flying under the radar and got on the radar. I remember talking to him at that time, the first time he was on the radar, and he was, I'll say the words, freaking out a little bit. Okay, Brian's is a very calm freaking out, but really wondering and questioning what to do. And this is what we call the danger zone. Danger is flashing all around. And we talked about it, but Brian very intuitively knew to go out on his own and to share the credit. So this, as you can see, is a very different leadership style. All right, so I'm going to summarize real quickly and then turn it over to Jim. Turn it back to Jim for Q&A. The summary is this: leading in complexity, leading through digital transformation. Is your organization prepared? It's only prepared if you adopt a new way of thinking about leadership. This leadership is for innovation, complexity, agility, all of those things, which also includes results. To do that, you actually, and we didn't get into this today, but you need to have a different kind of structure. You need to have different incentives and reward systems for leadership. You need to recognize and acknowledge the difference in leadership so that you can reward people like Brian, rather than force them to have to figure out on their own how they can innovate and create in your organization when they're trying to only produce results. So you've got to shift off just the results-oriented production thinking to an adaptability thinking, which is the entrepreneurial side of growth, that gets you to adaptability, along with the results that produces your viability in the short term. The mindsets you need: adaptive mindset, which is learning and growth mindset; emergence mindset, which is the really different one in complexity that Brian's describing; collaboration mindset, which is this different way of thinking about leadership as a collective; and then the one I'm clunkily calling outcomes mindset until Brian and others help me figure out the right word. But essentially, you need to think about outcomes differently, that it's not just the short-term results. And we do, to give a little bit of pitch, because I think Jim would want me to, we do cover this in our programs. So these are the things we're teaching in our advanced leadership certificate, also in our adaptive leader certificate, and other things. So with that, I turn it back to you, Jim, for Q&A.
Mary, thank you so much, and Brian as well. Thank you so much for that. That's a great look at what is both a challenge and a wonderful opportunity for organizations. And Mary, thanks for teeing me up. I did want to mention that, as I said earlier, we were fortunate to have both Mary and Brian as instructors in our Advanced Leadership Certificate program. And the themes they just teed up are themes we hear from our partners at Cook Children's, as Mary said, at Lockheed Martin, at JPS, and others. And we built this Advanced Leadership Certificate program to address these things and to get into some more detail and wrestle with those real world problems that we all share as we lead through this age of continuous transformation. So the Advanced Leadership Program, very quickly, is a 16-week certificate program. It's led by Mary, Brian, some other of our fantastic TCU faculty, Suzanne Carter and Mark Houston, Lance Betancourt, Michael Sherrod, among others, as well as some other folks from industry. And we have 4 main pillars. We talk about how do you lead through continuous transformation? How can you drive customer-centric innovation? We just did a session yesterday for the first cohort in this program, led by Rodney D'Souza, and we talked about how do you fund and nurture new ventures. And then lastly, we finish up with some of the themes that both Brian and Mary talked about today, is how do you lead the organization of the future? So we're going to follow this program, as I mentioned, with an email that gives you the recording. We'll give you some preview of future events, including the September 8th next session. And I'm happy to say that for everyone who's interested, we're pleased to offer a 30% discount on our Advanced Leadership Certificate, and you'll get some more information on that. That said, I'm going to open up the Q&A, and for Mary and Brian, what I'll do is, where it's directed to one of you, I'll start that way, but you both pair so well, I'll let you continue to do that. And I have a couple questions in the chat, and just a reminder for the participants, if you have a question you'd like to ask, please send it to me in the chat, and I'll do my best to fit it in. First question comes to us from Helen, who's asking, and starting with you, Mary, she's commenting on your comment that we need both styles of leadership, right? You need legacy leadership, you need adaptive leadership, but she's a 3-part question. First thing is it a fair statement to say there's complexity in every organization? And she's going to follow that by saying, if that's the case, so should every organization embrace the new adaptive leadership? And the last part is, when the organization itself is a constraint and doesn't provide the space for this new mindset, how do we support emergence of this new leadership? So complexity everywhere. Is it a fair statement we should embrace adaptive leadership? And then how do you support it in its emergence?
And I'm going to let Brian help me with that third one. So Brian, just to let you know. So is complexity everywhere? Well, you tell me. Look at the world we're operating in right now. I think complexity is pretty much everywhere. When we started the work in 2001, I remember we were presenting to a bank. This was Russ Marion, my co-author, and me. We were presenting to a bank. There was a banker in the room. Brian, you'll like this. And oh my gosh, the guy, I know he just wanted to get up and leave. It was driving him crazy, us talking about this adaptability stuff and the world's changing. And he was like, he literally did. It was everything it took to keep him in his seat. He was just trying not to be rude. So we faced a lot of that. A lot of people were really struggling. And we were like the one who's Chicken Little, the sky's falling. We kept saying complexity is coming, it's coming. And then we watched it come. So the quick story of this is 2010 complexity tipped. I describe it as tipping, where we had the global financial crisis. Leaders around the world in the IBM Global CEO report said, complexity is here. It is the number one challenge facing us. What we know about it is it's going to only get bigger and not go away. And what we also know is we have no idea what to do about it. So this is 2010. I said, yay, I know what to do about it. So that was a lot of fun. So then around 2014, I described the foundation under that tower that's flipped now starts crumbling. And it's like quicksand. Everything is going down. Things we thought we knew, assumptions we had, rules we thought were in place really tipped. And that was due to social media, where we had such a change in the way the world operated when you have so many voices that are allowed to engage. It took away traditional power dynamics and it crumbled. So that was the next time period I saw, 2014. And then we had the election in the US, and the 2016 election was clearly a complexity event. So people then started understanding, when they were trying to understand what happened in the leadership and how that presidential election went and how we got the president we did and what was going on and all the dynamics around it and the social movements, that's all complexity. So the answer is yes, complexity is everywhere. Now, does that mean you have to be in it all the time? No, and I hope you're not, because complexity is really draining. Just think of yourselves in pandemic. It can burn you out. So what you want to do in an organization is you want to have it set up so that it's flexible, meaning that it can operate in order when it needs to. But when complexity comes in, it comes in as an event, and it creates pockets of complexity, dynamics of tension in the organization. Your organization can enable an adaptive response to address that complexity, but you don't want to leave people in it all the time. And I think any leaders here will tell you, you've been working to try to help your people not be in complexity all the time. So you don't want to avoid it. You want to make sure that you address it, but address it as needed. And then organizational constraints. Again, I'm going to say in the early work, that was the main thing I dealt with. And organizations I was working with and people I was teaching and talking to were all struggling with that. So a lot of our work was around constraints. But I think now organizations, the transformation that's happened in the last year due to COVID is a significant transformation that's not going away. We are in a new order, a new world order, a new business order. It is not the same old. And we are now more adaptive, and that adaptability is here to stay. So Brian, I don't know if you want to add anything to any of that.
Yeah, well, agreed with all that, Mary. A few quick thoughts. One is the world is changing even prior to COVID in dramatic ways with its innovation cycles. And whole industries are being reinvented, mostly due to the technology revolution. And what's a little can be deceiving is it may feel like if you're in a business that things are stable, but the world around can be changing and sneaking up on little cat feet. And all of a sudden you wake up and your business model is no longer relevant. And that's an externally inflicted complexity moment, which is all of a sudden you're losing customers and revenue and you're like, am I going to survive? And then you have a choice to adapt. Sometimes it's too late. So I think what's really powerful is to create adaptive moments on your own as a company before the market forces you to. And that is a really powerful position to be in. And then the question, which I think was a good one, is what about an organization that doesn't embrace this? And my advice in that moment is this. I would make sure that you are talking to all different levels of the organization. Often maybe what you're seeing at whatever level you're at in the system is the same thing the CEO is just incredibly frustrated and feeling so much anxiety about. And maybe you just haven't talked to the person who's just as worried as you are about the very thing and is looking for an ally to change the company. And so I've just found a lot of freedom in not restricting myself on who I talk to. And it's not just more senior. It could be maybe some other leader just has a very unique perspective. So I would say go find allies. And you can also then maybe be the one that brings in the context using a third party, a competitor, maybe things going on in the market that suddenly reveals and shines the light. Now is the time to change and create that pressure in the organization to embrace all those changes that then will create a ripple of complexity as Mary described.
So a couple of quick summaries, Jim. The kind of pressures Brian is talking about, there are two kinds. One is an entrepreneurial opportunity tension. That's what Brian does. He sees it entrepreneurially and he creates the pressure and then drives the change more internally from his standpoint. The other is an adaptive tension pressure, which is the world has shifted. This is COVID. The world has shifted and we have no choice. And it's the most extreme of that is adapt or die. And then to the point of constraints, the other thing I think is really important is, yes, the constraints are there, but you also have to understand many times the constraints are in our own heads in the way that we're leading. And this is what we do in the exec programs, is really help people learn how to do this. You need to have the right mindset because you have to understand that this pushback and the conflicting is natural. It's a part of the process and it's going to occur. You can't take that as resistance. And that's where Brian said, he already knew that, but he even realized, gosh, now I even have to look at myself. If Brian, you would talk about this, look at myself around how I'm viewing the resistance. The words you said to me were in the class you spoke to was, I got curious about myself. Can you just talk about that real quickly?
Yeah, for sure. So a lot of times what you hear, or I've noticed in myself, I'm hearing as they're resisting me, is just they're talking about a different facet of the problem that I had a blind spot on. And so what I've really been working to do is when I feel blocked or resisted, is step back and just ask myself, what really is this person saying? And maybe this is a chance for me to learn something I didn't understand. And maybe it's a chance for me to challenge my very base hypothesis. I could be wrong. And maintaining that real curious willingness to be wrong, I think is a massively powerful shift that then makes it about the problem, not about me or about the person. And that also takes a lot of the pressure out of the room and gets everybody focused on the problem, which is a very powerful shift to make.
Great. Thank you both so much. I have a follow-up question here from Mark Jones, which kind of think extends the conversation we just had, and I'll give it to you both. And what Mark asks is, do you find that digital transformation is really a catalyst for cultural change, which is around innovation and leadership?
Okay, Brian, that one to you.
Yeah, I absolutely, because if what we could do is just, we have a company, let's say, and we think, let's reinvent it using most advanced cloud-based, cloud-native capabilities and just make this thing like the most amazing company we've ever seen before. You could maybe get a small group of people and blank sheet it and write the new thing down and say, let's just go do it. But that's often not the hard part. The hard part is you have dozens or hundreds of legacy functions with leaders and people and processes and history and outcomes. And you're trying to navigate maybe a bit of like, we kind of know where we want to go, but how do we go from where we are to where we want to go? And that is a very complicated undertaking because you need to deliver through the seam. You still have to serve customers through the seam, generate revenue. You can't just stop your business for 2 years, reinvent yourself, and then open back up. So that means you're not just solving a technical problem. You're not just solving a strategic problem. You are solving a human behavior problem. And that is around all these functions that have careers built on them and families and who they, sometimes their identity, who they believe they are. It's like a human is so connected with this work they're doing. And you're saying we're going to blow that all up and start over. That's incredibly terrifying. And so I think, you know, I'm not diminishing the power of the technical problem solving or the strategic problem solving, but it is also a human problem at its very core. And getting behavior to change and mindsets to change, it is all of that. This is what makes it so much fun.
Thank you so much. Well, I think we have time for one more question. This one comes from Morgan Landry, who asks, what is an effective way to train others on your team to switch from a legacy mindset to an adaptive mindset, a more collaborative mindset?
I'll let you do that one too, Brian.
Well, it is an awesome question. One of the things that comes to me is it starts by leading by example as a leader. And that shows up as honoring others around you and giving credit to them, not just your own team, but your colleagues, your peers, your partners, and really modeling that. The other thing that I've been working on is not just making this a hidden system that I'm working as a leader to drive change, but surfacing my system, if you will, by documenting it, writing it down, practicing and experimenting with it. I have years of written versions of my leadership modes, a lot of what I've described today, but in more detail, and writing with boxes and words and pictures and arrows and so forth. And I now, every new person on my team, I talk about this as part of their orientation. And then we talk about it as a leadership team, and we start practicing these things to surface it. We build it into our performance management. So we're talking about competencies and the way people approach each other. We bring up things like, are they a good team player? Are they collaborative? Are they giving the credit where it's due? We gather 360 feedback to get another view on that. So I think it's modeling the way, it's using examples, it's surfacing the leadership model as a thing to talk about, and it's aligning the incentives from a performance management standpoint are the ingredients that come to me on that.
Great. Thank you both so much. I really want to thank everyone, but particularly we'll start with Brian and Mary. Thank you for spending your time and your insights with us and sharing those. Thanks to Peggy and Dean Pullen for hosting the event today. We really appreciate that. Thank you to all of our alumni who joined us today. We really appreciate the time you took to join us today and for all you do for the Neeley School. So thank you so much for that. As I mentioned, we'll follow this up with an email that will give you some more information about future Alumni Advantage programs. We had a number of questions about the Advanced Leadership Certificate, so we'll send a link out with more information and a discount for that program. And we'll include some other things around some upcoming events that are hosted by our MBA program. We have a program coming up around how do you harness disruption for sustained competitive advantage. We'll give you some information on that. So thank you again and enjoy your weekend. Take care.